Have you ever found yourself feeling insignificant or powerless when confronted with an overwhelming challenge? Have you ever experienced the daunting feeling that everyone and everything seemed to be working against you, even as you tried to stand firm in doing what you knew was right? If these feelings resonate with you, then you might find that you share more in common than you realize with one of the most renowned kings in history. Prepare to embark on an inspiring exploration of the life of David, a humble shepherd who rose to become Israel's most cherished king and was famously described as a man after God's own heart. But let's not misunderstand his story. David was far from perfect. His life was marked by soaring triumphs as well as crushing defeats, moments of profound faith and times of personal failure. This very mixture of human frailty and divine purpose is what makes his journey so compelling and relatable to our own lives today. Let us start at the very beginning, exploring the remarkable and improbable rise of a young shepherd to the court of the king. Our narrative opens in Bethlehem, a modest and unassuming town situated on the outskirts of Jerusalem. Here we encounter the household of Jesse, a seemingly ordinary man, yet destined to be part of a lineage that would alter the trajectory of Israel's history forever. According to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1, the Lord directed the prophet Samuel to journey to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, with a secret yet profoundly important mission: to anoint the next king of Israel. Jesse was the father of 8 sons, with David the youngest of them all. While his elder brothers were noted for their strength and commanding presence, David was often found in the pastures, faithfully tending to his father's flock of sheep. This humble and unassuming duty, though it appeared trivial, was quietly forging the character and spirit of Israel's future king. Amidst the tranquil fields of Bethlehem, David was being taught lessons that no royal palace could ever impart. He cultivated bravery by defending his sheep from predatory beasts, nurtured compassion by tending to the most vulnerable among the flock, and honed leadership as he guided them to lush pastures and calm, refreshing waters. Unbeknownst to David himself, these simple acts of diligence were preparing him for the monumental task of leading a nation, as described in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 11. When the prophet Samuel arrived at Jesse's home, one by one, Jesse's older sons were presented to him. However, none of them were the ones the Lord had chosen. Puzzled by this, Samuel inquired of Jesse, asking whether he had any other sons. Jesse responded, "There is still the youngest, but he is out in the fields tending the sheep." When David was finally brought before Samuel, one can imagine the prophet's heart leaping with recognition. Before Samuel stood a young man with a healthy, ruddy complexion, strikingly beautiful eyes, and a handsome appearance. Yet it was not these outward traits that truly mattered. It was what the Lord saw within. "Rise and anoint him," the Lord said to Samuel, "for this is the one chosen." In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 13, we witness the pivotal moment that would alter both David's life and the destiny of the nation of Israel. Samuel took the horn of oil and ceremonially anointed David, right there in the presence of his older brothers. At that very moment, the Spirit of the Lord descended powerfully upon David, marking him for the divine purpose ahead. Picture the scene vividly. A young shepherd boy, likely both bewildered and amazed, being anointed as the future king of all Israel. His older brothers, who had always regarded him as merely their youngest sibling, now stood witness to an extraordinary and unexpected event. However, this was only the beginning of David's remarkable journey. Following his anointing, David went back to the fields where his responsibilities awaited him. On the surface, it seemed as though nothing had changed. He remained a shepherd, continuing to tend the sheep as he had always done. Yet within him, a profound transformation had already begun. The Spirit of the Lord was now resting upon him, quietly equipping him for the monumental task that lay ahead. At the same time, a shadow was descending upon King Saul's court. According to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 14 to 23, the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, leaving him tormented by an evil spirit. In their search for relief, Saul's servants proposed finding someone skilled in playing the harp, believing that the soothing power of music might calm the troubled king. It was during this discussion that David's name was mentioned. One of Saul's servants, familiar with David, described him as not only a talented musician, but also a brave and capable warrior, articulate and possessing a striking appearance. Most significantly, the servant noted, "The Lord is with him." And so David was called to the royal court of King Saul. This young shepherd, who only recently had been tending sheep in the fields of Bethlehem, now found himself in the grandeur of the royal palace, playing his harp to calm the king's tormented soul. Saul was so impressed by David that he appointed him as his armor-bearer, a position of both trust and honor. At this juncture, we can see how God was sovereignly orchestrating the unfolding events in David's life. David's skill as a musician, cultivated through countless solitary hours in the fields, now placed him in a position to observe the intricacies of the royal court and leadership, preparing him for his eventual destiny as king. However, the defining moment of David's youth was still on the horizon. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, we encounter one of the most iconic events in the Bible, David's confrontation with Goliath. At this time, the Israelites were at war with the Philistines, and their champion, a giant named Goliath, issued a daily challenge to Israel's army, demanding a single combatant to face him. Towering over all others, Goliath stood approximately 3 meters tall. The weight of his armor exceeded 50 kilograms, and the tip of his massive spear was comparable to a weaver's beam. For 40 consecutive days, Goliath mocked and taunted the Israelite army, daring them to send out a warrior to face him in battle. During this time, David, having temporarily returned home to care for his father's sheep, was sent to the battlefield with provisions for his older brothers. When David arrived and heard Goliath's insolent challenge, he was filled with righteous indignation. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David boldly inquired. David's boldness in confronting the giant was not a sudden burst of bravery. It had been forged over years in the fields of Bethlehem, where he had faced and defeated lions and bears in defense of his flock. When questioned about his capability to stand against Goliath, David confidently declared, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Armed solely with his sling, 5 carefully chosen smooth stones from a nearby brook, and an unshakable faith in God, David boldly stepped forward to confront Goliath. The disparity between the two opponents could not have been more striking. On one side stood a young, unarmored shepherd. On the other, a seasoned warrior clad in heavy armor. A simple sling faced off against an imposing sword. It was a clash of faith against sheer physical might. As Goliath laid eyes on David, he derided him, scoffing at his youth and apparent insignificance. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" the giant sneered mockingly. Yet David's reply was filled with such conviction and faith that his words would resonate for generations to come. "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." With a single well-aimed stone from his sling, David struck Goliath squarely in the forehead. The mighty giant collapsed to the ground. In a moment, what seemed utterly impossible had become reality. The humble shepherd had triumphed over the fearsome warrior. Faith had prevailed over fear and overwhelming odds. David's victory was far more than a military success. It was a profound testament to the incredible power of unwavering faith in God. This moment demonstrated to both Israel and the world that the Lord's perspective is not bound by human standards. While others judge based on outward appearances, God discerned the intentions and purity of the heart. This monumental event signaled the true beginning of David's ascent, transforming him from an unnoticed shepherd in Bethlehem into a national figure. In the aftermath, David became a celebrated hero throughout Israel almost instantaneously. Women across the land came out to sing songs of his triumph. "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands," they sang in admiration. David's early years, from the time of his secret anointing by Samuel to his public triumph over Goliath, formed the foundation for the incredible journey that lay ahead. These events impart powerful lessons about the importance of preparation, the nature of true courage, and the profound strength that comes from trusting in God. David's rise to greatness as a leader was not instantaneous. Each formative experience during his youth, shepherding sheep, playing the harp for Saul, and facing Goliath, served as a stepping stone in the development of his character and leadership abilities. Long before confronting Goliath on the battlefield, David had already faced and overcome other challenges that prepared him for this pivotal moment. David's early story is a vivid reminder that God often operates in the background, shaping us for a destiny far greater than we can comprehend. During those times when life feels insignificant, when we are overlooked or undervalued, God may actually be refining our character and equipping us with the abilities we will one day require. David's boldness when facing Goliath inspires us to confront the formidable challenges in our own lives with the same unwavering faith. What are the Goliaths that we encounter in our own journeys? Perhaps they are fears, deep insecurities, or challenges that seem impossible to overcome. David's story reassures us that with God on our side, no obstacle is too daunting to conquer. Finally, David's youthful experiences underscore the vital importance of remaining faithful in small and seemingly mundane tasks. Before commanding armies, David faithfully led a flock of sheep. Before performing before crowds, David honed his musical talents in the solitude of open fields. His steadfast commitment to these unremarkable duties prepared him for the monumental responsibilities that awaited him in the future. As we continue to explore David's journey, it becomes clear how these formative years shaped the extraordinary leader he was destined to become. His experiences as a humble shepherd, a talented musician, and a courageous young warrior all contributed to the foundation for his reign as Israel's greatest king. However, the path ahead for David would be anything but easy. He would encounter severe trials, relentless persecution, and profound temptations that would push his faith and character to their very limits. David's triumph over Goliath signaled the beginning of an entirely new chapter in his life. The once obscure shepherd boy was now celebrated throughout Israel as a national war hero. Amidst the celebrations of his victory, an unexpected and deep friendship began to take root within King Saul's court. Jonathan, the son of Saul and heir to the throne, was profoundly moved and inspired by David. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 1, we are given a vivid and heartfelt depiction of this remarkable friendship. It is written, "After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself." This was no casual or superficial acquaintance. It was a profound bond founded on mutual respect and deep admiration. The extraordinary depth of this friendship is revealed through Jonathan's selfless actions. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 4, we witness a highly symbolic and meaningful act. Jonathan removed his royal robe and placed it on David, also giving him his tunic, his sword, his bow, and even his belt. This gesture was far more than a simple gift exchange between friends. In the cultural context of the time, it symbolized Jonathan's acknowledgement of David's divine right to the throne. As the rightful heir to the throne, Jonathan was, in essence, relinquishing his claim in favor of David. While this remarkable friendship flourished, David continued to gain admiration and favor, not only with King Saul, but also with the people of Israel. According to 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5, whatever mission Saul sent him on David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This decision was met with approval by all, including the troops and Saul's senior officers. David proved himself not only as a fearless warrior on the battlefield, but also as a leader endowed with wisdom and exceptional skill. Yet David's growing success and popularity would soon give rise to significant troubles. Following one particularly remarkable military triumph, the women of Israel gathered to celebrate, singing joyfully. "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands," they sang, as recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 7. Although this song praised both Saul and David, it sparked a deep and consuming jealousy within King Saul's heart. Saul's reaction to the song marked the start of a dramatic and hostile change in his attitude toward David. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 8 to 9, it is written, "Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Saul's envy soon escalated into outright hostility and dangerous actions aimed at David. The very next day, as described in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 10 to 11, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house, and David was playing the lyre as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand and hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. This episode marked the start of a prolonged period during which Saul relentlessly pursued and attempted to kill David. The once celebrated young warrior, who had been warmly received into the king's court, now found himself in unceasing peril. Even as Saul's animosity intensified, David's success and favor continued to grow. As recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 14 to 16, in everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Realizing that direct attempts to kill David were failing, Saul resorted to more cunning and underhanded schemes to bring about David's demise. One such plan revolved around his daughter Michal. According to 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 20 to 21, now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," Saul thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." Saul offered Michal to David in marriage, but he attached a perilous condition to the offer. He stipulated that David must bring 100 foreskins of Philistines as a dowry, secretly hoping that David would perish in the dangerous endeavor. To Saul's dismay, David not only survived but doubled the requirement, bringing back 200 foreskins. Left with no alternative, Saul was forced to follow through and give Michal to David in marriage. Yet this marriage to Michal did not provide David with the safety he might have hoped for. Saul's hostility toward David only continued to escalate. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 1, it is written, "Saul told his son Jonathan and all his attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David." This passage highlights how the deep friendship between David and Jonathan became essential to David's survival during this turbulent time. Risking his standing in the royal court, Jonathan interceded on David's behalf. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 4 to 5, Jonathan pleaded, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and everything he has done has brought great benefit to you. He risked his own life when he faced the Philistine in battle. The Lord brought about a great victory for all of Israel, and you were there to witness it and rejoice. Why then would you bring harm to an innocent man like David by killing him without just cause?" For a brief time, Saul was persuaded by Jonathan's reasoning and made an oath. "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death," Saul declared, as recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 6. However, this period of peace was fleeting. Before long, the evil spirit once again descended upon Saul, driving him to attempt David's life with his spear. Though David evaded the attack, it became painfully clear that his life was no longer secure within Saul's court. At this critical juncture, Michal, David's wife, played an instrumental role in aiding his escape. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 11 to 12, it is written, "Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, 'If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed.' So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. This marked the beginning of David's long and arduous period of exile. The man who had once been celebrated as Israel's hero and a favorite within the royal court was now reduced to living as a fugitive, constantly on the run in his own land. Throughout this time of uncertainty, David sought refuge and assistance in several different places. His first stop was at Nob, where he approached the priest Ahimelech. To conceal his dire situation, David falsely claimed to be on a secret mission for the king. Unaware of the potential risks, Ahimelech provided David with consecrated bread for sustenance and the sword of Goliath as a weapon. While this act of kindness may have seemed inconsequential at the time, it would later have devastating consequences. Later, Doeg the Edomite, who had witnessed the exchange, reported it to Saul. This act of betrayal resulted in the massacre of Ahimelech and numerous other priests at Nob. From Nob, David escaped to Gath, a Philistine city, where he resorted to feigning insanity to avoid being identified as the celebrated Israelite warrior who had slain Goliath. Subsequently, David sought refuge in the cave of Adullam. According to 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 2, all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. Meanwhile, Saul persisted in his relentless and obsessive pursuit of David. The king's fixation on destroying David drove him to commit heinous acts, such as the slaughter of the priest at Nob, who had unknowingly provided assistance to David. During this turbulent period, David was presented with two significant opportunities to kill Saul, yet he steadfastly refused to act on either. The first opportunity took place in the cave of En-Gedi. Saul entered the cave to relieve himself, completely unaware that David and his men were concealed within. In 1 Samuel chapter 24 verses 4 to 6, we read the men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of, when he said to you, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish." Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. And he said to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord." The second chance arose when David infiltrated Saul's camp under the cover of night and discovered the king sleeping. Once again, David chose not to harm Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 26 verses 9 to 11, David said, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come, and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed." These actions vividly illustrate David's profound reverence for God's established authority, even when that authority, in the form of Saul, was being wielded unjustly against him. David understood that, despite Saul's significant shortcomings, he was still the anointed king of Israel, and it was not David's place to seize the throne through violent means. Saul's relentless pursuit of David stretched on for years, driving David to live as a fugitive, not only within Israel but even among its enemies. Throughout this difficult period, David penned many of the Psalms that we treasure today, pouring out his anguish, steadfast trust in God, and unwavering commitment to faithfulness. This prolonged time of fleeing and exile was a vital season of personal growth and spiritual formation for David. Stripped of the comforts of palace life and the accolades of military triumphs, David was forced to place his complete trust in God amidst extraordinarily challenging circumstances. During this time, he cultivated invaluable leadership skills, gathering and effectively commanding a diverse group of followers. These formative experiences served to prepare David for the immense responsibilities he would later bear as king over Israel. Saul's relentless hunt for David finally came to an end, with Saul's death during a fateful battle against the Philistines. Faced with a hopeless situation, Saul took his own life rather than face the humiliation of being captured by his enemies. When the tragic news reached David, his response was not one of triumph, but of deep lamentation. In 2 Samuel chapter 1 verses 19 to 24, part of David's poignant lament is recorded, "Your glory. Israel lies slain on your heights. How the mighty have fallen, Saul and Jonathan. In life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and finery, who adorned your garments with ornaments of gold." This heart-wrenching lament reflects David's noble character and capacity for grace. Despite enduring years of persecution, David was able to acknowledge the virtues of Saul and honor his legacy with heartfelt sincerity. Furthermore, David's sorrowful lament for Jonathan is profoundly touching, emphasizing the deep and abiding bond of their friendship. David's transformation from a trusted friend of the king to a hunted fugitive was a long and arduous journey. Yet these trials served to refine and fortify David's character. He gained invaluable lessons in humility, patience, and unwavering trust in God, qualities that would be essential in his eventual role as Israel's king. The story of David's relationship with Saul provides profound insights into leadership, the corrosive effects of jealousy, the power of genuine friendship, and the importance of faithfulness to God. It reveals how envy can consume and corrupt even those chosen by God, while integrity and faith can sustain individuals through even the harshest of trials. As David prepared to take his place on the throne that God had promised him long before, He brought with him the hard-earned lessons from his years of persecution and exile. These formative experiences would deeply influence his leadership as king and his relationship with God throughout the rest of his life. The tragic news of Saul and Jonathan's deaths was delivered to David by a young Amalekite. This messenger, hoping to curry favor with David, falsely claimed that he had delivered the final blow to Saul at the king's own request. Instead, the messenger's expectations were dashed by David's decisive and unexpected response, as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 14 to 16. Then David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of his soldiers and said, "Go kill him." So he struck him down and he died. For David had said to the Amalekite, "You are responsible for your own death, for your own mouth testified against you when you said, 'I killed the Lord's anointed.'" This act showcased David's profound reverence for the authority established by God, even when that authority had been misused against him personally. It also sent a clear message that any attempt to curry favor with David through acts of treachery or violence against his enemies would be met with severe consequences. After a time of mourning for Saul and Jonathan, David turned to the Lord, seeking divine direction for his next course of action, as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up to one of the towns of Judah?" The Lord said, "Go up." David asked, "Where shall I go?" This act of consulting God before making decisions became a defining feature of David's reign, setting him apart from Saul, who frequently acted on impulse. Upon his arrival in Hebron, David was anointed as king over the tribe of Judah. As it is written in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4, "Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah." This marked the initial step in the realization of God's promise to David, made years earlier when he was privately anointed by Samuel. However, David's rise to the throne of a united Israel would not come quickly or without significant challenges. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, declared Saul's son, Ishbosheth, as king over the remaining tribes of Israel. This decision sparked a prolonged civil war between the house of Saul and the house of David. In 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1, we read, "The war between the house of Saul and the house of David lasted a long time. David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker." This verse provides a concise summary of the overarching trend of events during this turbulent time. However, the details of this civil conflict are steeped in tragedy and filled with layers of complexity. Among the notable events of this period was the untimely death of Abner. Following a significant dispute with Ishbosheth, Abner resolved to shift his allegiance to David. David welcomed Abner warmly and sent him away in peace. David welcomed Abner warmly and sent him away in peace. However, Joab, David's military commander, viewed Abner as a potential threat and murdered him in retaliation for the death of his own brother. David's response to Abner's assassination is telling. In 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 28 to 29, David proclaimed, "Later, when David heard about this, he said, 'I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord. Concerning the death of Abner, son of Nair, it is Joab and his family who are guilty. May Joab's family never be free of someone who has a running sore, or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food.'" This pronouncement underscores David's steadfast commitment to justice and his unwillingness to condone unjustified violence, even when it came from his closest allies. The civil war ultimately ended with the assassination of Ishbosheth, who was treacherously killed by two of his own commanders. Seeking a reward from David, these men brought Ishbosheth's severed head to him in Hebron. Once again, David's response defied expectations. In 2 Samuel chapter 4, verses 9 to 12, we read, "But David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, 'As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of all trouble. When someone told me Saul is dead and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death at Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed? Shouldn't I now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you?' So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung the bodies by the pool in Hebron. but they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. With Ishbosheth's death, the path was finally cleared for David to ascend as king over all of Israel. The unification of the kingdom is described in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 to 3. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. This anointing at Hebron represented the fulfillment of the divine promise God had made to David many years earlier. The humble shepherd, the gifted court musician, and the fugitive warrior had now risen to become the king of all Israel. One of David's earliest significant acts as the king of a unified Israel was the capture of Jerusalem. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 to 7, we read, "The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, 'You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off.' They thought David cannot get in here. Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David. David's decision to make Jerusalem the capital of his kingdom was a masterstroke of strategic brilliance. Positioned at the border between the territories of the northern and southern tribes, Jerusalem was ideally located to function as a unifying center for the entire nation. Furthermore, because Jerusalem had not been historically aligned with any particular tribe, it had the potential to serve as a truly national city for all of Israel. Once Jerusalem was firmly established as his capital, David had to contend with the ongoing threat posed by the Philistines. This confrontation is described in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 17 to 21. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, they went up in full force to search for him. But David heard about it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. So David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hands?" The Lord answered him, "Go, for I will surely deliver the Philistines into your hands." So David went to Baal-perazim, and there he defeated them. He said, "As waters break out, the Lord has broken out against my enemies before me." So that place was called Baal-perazim. The Philistines abandoned their idols there, and David and his men carried them off. This triumph over the Philistines was not only a major military success, but also a profound spiritual victory. The capture and destruction of the Philistine idols served as a powerful demonstration of the supremacy of the God of Israel over the deities of surrounding nations. With the kingdom unified and Jerusalem secured as the capital, David directed his focus towards spiritual and religious matters. Among his foremost priorities was bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. The Ark, a symbol of God's presence among his people, had been absent from the heart of Israel's national and spiritual life for many years. David's initial attempt to transport the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, however, ended in a devastating tragedy. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 6 to 7, it is written, "When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the Ark of God, because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the Ark of God." This sobering incident served as a powerful reminder to David and all of Israel about God's absolute holiness and the necessity of adhering strictly to his commands. After leaving the Ark in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months, during which time the household was richly blessed, David carefully planned a second attempt to bring it to Jerusalem. On this occasion, the Ark was transported in the strict accordance with God's instructions, carried on poles by the Levites as prescribed in the law. The arrival of the Ark in Jerusalem was a moment of jubilant celebration. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 14 to 15, it is recorded, "Wearing a linen ephod, David danced before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel brought up the Ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets." David's exuberant dance before the Ark was an unrestrained act of worship and total devotion to the Lord. However, not everyone shared in the joy or appreciated this expression of worship. Michal, Saul's daughter and David's wife, looked upon his actions with disdain and criticized him harshly. David's reply to Michal, found in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 21 to 22, offers a profound glimpse into his heart and priorities. David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people, Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you mentioned, I will be held in honor." Now that the Ark of the Covenant was securely established in Jerusalem, David longed to construct a permanent temple to serve as its resting place. However, God's plans for the temple differed from David's intentions. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 5 to 7, God's response to David is delivered through the prophet Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build a house for me to dwell in? I have not dwelt in a house since the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt. To this day I have been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling, wherever I have moved with all the Israelites. Did I ever say to any of their rulers who I commanded to shepherd my people, Israel, why have you not built me a house of cedar?" While God declined David's desire to build the temple, he made an extraordinary covenant with David, as recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 11 to 16. God promises, "The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors. I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever. Before me, your throne will be established forever." This monumental declaration, known as the Davidic Covenant, is one of the pivotal moments in the entire history of Israel. Through this covenant, God assured David of an eternal dynasty, a promise ultimately fulfilled in Jesus Christ, the perfect and eternal Son of David. David's reaction to this profound promise was a heartfelt prayer filled with gratitude and humility. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 18 to 19, we read, "Then King David went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, 'Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family that you have brought me this far? And as if this were not enough in your sight, sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant. Is this your usual way of dealing with mankind, sovereign Lord?' David's rise to the throne of Israel ushered in a transformative new era for the nation. Under David's guidance, Israel emerged as a significant regional power, extending its borders and forming strategic alliances with neighboring kingdoms. Even more crucially, David firmly established Jerusalem as both the political capital of Israel and its spiritual epicenter. David's reign, though extraordinary, was not without its share of significant challenges and personal shortcomings, as the subsequent chapters of his life reveal. Nevertheless, the groundwork David established during the formative years of his rule, a unified nation, a capital city, and a renewed focus on God, would profoundly influence Israel's destiny for generations to come. David's ascent from humble obscurity in Bethlehem to the royal throne in Jerusalem stands as a striking testament to God's sovereign will and his intricate plans for his people. At every stage of his journey, whether as a shepherd, a court musician, a fugitive warrior, or a king, David displayed an unyielding faith in God and an unwavering dedication to his divine purposes. David's rise to power was far more than a personal victory. It represented a pivotal moment in the unfolding story of Israel's history. Under David's leadership, Israel discovered a newfound sense of unity, strength, and a clear focus on its divine purpose. By designating Jerusalem as the nation's capital and establishing the Ark of the Covenant there, David set the stage for what would become the heart of Jewish worship for centuries to come. The Davidic covenant, through which God promised an everlasting dynasty, extended beyond David's earthly kingdom to a glorious and eternal messianic hope. This divine promise became a cornerstone of Israel's faith and hope, ultimately fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. David's life story offers profound lessons about the virtues of patience, the strength found in perseverance, and the importance of trusting in God's perfect timing. David endured years of waiting for God's promise to come to fruition, facing trials of persecution and prolonged exile along the way. Yet he steadfastly resisted the temptation to take the kingdom by force, choosing instead to honor the authority that God had established, even when that authority treated him unjustly. Simultaneously, David exemplified a leader who, though imperfect, was always willing to learn from his failures and seek God's direction for his life. His response to Uzzah's death in the subsequent deliberate and reverent transport of the ark to Jerusalem reveal a heart that was open to correction and deeply submissive to God's will, even when it required acknowledging past mistakes. Once David was firmly established as the king of all Israel, he faced new and formidable challenges. His rule would be characterized by significant military victories and extensive territorial expansion, but it would also be marred by grievous personal sins and heartbreaking family struggles. Nevertheless, the firm foundation David laid, marked by a profound reliance on God, a dedication to justice, and a heart devoted to worship, would remain the defining traits of his reign and enduring legacy. The story of David's rise to power is far more than a tale of individual success. It stands as a powerful testimony to how God's transformative work can shape both a person's life and the destiny of a nation. It remains an inspiring and instructive narrative, reminding us that God often chooses the most unlikely individuals to fulfill his plans, and that true greatness is born from humble submission to his sovereign will. With the kingdom unified and Jerusalem firmly established as its capital, David shifted his focus toward expanding Israel's territory and solidifying its strength as a nation. His military endeavors were characterized by a series of remarkable victories. Some of these conquests are detailed in 2 Samuel chapter 8, verses 2-6. He also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them with a cord. Every 2 measures of men he separated, one to be killed and one complete measure to remain alive. So the Moabites became subject to David and brought tribute. David also defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehab, king of Zobah, as he went to restore his monument along the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 7,000 cavalry and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all the chariot horses except 100 of them. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 of them. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him and brought tribute. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. These conquests not only extended the boundaries of Israel, but also brought immense wealth and resources to the kingdom. David consecrated much of the spoils of war to the Lord, reflecting his deep gratitude to God for granting him victory in battle. In addition to his military achievements, David's reign was distinguished by his commitment to justice and acts of compassion. In 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 1, we see David asking, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" This inquiry led David to Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, to whom David extended great kindness, fulfilling the promise he had made to his beloved friend. Though David achieved many great successes, his reign was also marred by personal failures that carried significant and enduring repercussions. The story begins in 2 Samuel 11, verses 1-2 in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war. David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rubber, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. Bathsheba, the woman in question, was the wife of Uriah the Hittite, a highly esteemed soldier in David's elite forces. Rather than averting his gaze, David sent for Bathsheba and committed the grave sin of adultery with her. Upon learning that Bathsheba was pregnant, David devised a plan to conceal his wrongdoing. His first strategy was to summon Uriah home from the battlefield, intending for him to spend the night with his wife so he would believe the child was his. However, Uriah, displaying remarkable loyalty and integrity, refused to enjoy the comforts of home while his fellow soldiers remained on the battlefield. In 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 11, Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my lord Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing." Realizing that his original scheme had failed, David resorted to an even more sinister plan. He sent Uriah back to the battlefield, carrying a sealed message for Joab that instructed the commander to place Uriah in the thickest part of the battle and then withdraw, leaving him to die. After Uriah's death, David brought Bathsheba into his household and made her his wife. David might have believed his transgression was successfully concealed, but nothing is hidden from the eyes of God. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 1, it is written, "The Lord sent Nathan to David." The prophet Nathan approached David with a parable, telling of a wealthy man who stole and slaughtered the sole lamb of a poor man. Outraged by the injustice in the story, David proclaimed that the rich man deserved to die for his cruelty. It was at this moment that Nathan boldly declared, "You are that man." Nathan's direct confrontation brought David to a place of profound repentance. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 13, David openly confessed, "I have sinned against the Lord." While God extended forgiveness to David, the repercussions of his sin were both severe and far-reaching. Nathan foretold that violence and strife would plague David's household, and that the child born from his union with Bathsheba would not survive. As prophesied, the child born to David and Bathsheba fell gravely ill, and despite David's fervent prayers and fasting, the baby passed away after 7 days. David's response to the death of his child is deeply noteworthy. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 20, we read, "Then David got up from the ground, washed himself, put on lotions, and changed his clothes. He went into the house of the Lord and worshipped." When asked about his actions, David exhibited his trust in God's sovereignty. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 23, he said, "But now that he is dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back again? I will go to him, but he will not return to me." The aftermath of David's sin unraveled over the ensuing years, bringing more turmoil to his household. One of Nathan's most harrowing prophecies came to pass when Amnon, David's eldest son, violated his half-sister Tamar. This despicable act set off a chain of revenge and rebellion within David's family, ultimately culminating in Absalom's insurrection. Absalom's uprising compelled David to flee Jerusalem, evoking memories of his earlier escape from Saul during his fugitive years. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 30, we are presented with a poignant scene of David. But David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads and were weeping as they went up. During this time of exile, David endured scorn and humiliation, yet he responded with remarkable humility and unwavering trust in God. When Shimei, a man from Saul's family, cursed him, David's response revealed his deep submission to God. Samuel chapter 16, verses 11 to 12. "Leave him alone. Let him curse me, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of his curse." Ultimately, Absalom's rebellion came to a tragic end with his death, despite David's explicit orders to spare his life. David's lament over Absalom's death stands as one of the most heart-rending passages in Scripture. In 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33, it is written, "The king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and wept. As he went, he said, 'Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son.'" Even amidst these personal tragedies, David's reign persisted with significant military successes and widespread prosperity for Israel. Nevertheless, near the close of his reign, David made another critical mistake by ordering an unauthorized census of the people. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 10, David acknowledged his sin, saying, "After he had counted the fighting men, David was conscience-stricken, and he said to the Lord, 'I have sinned greatly in what I have done. Now, Lord, I beg you, take away the guilt of your servant. I have done a very foolish thing.'" This ill-advised census brought about a devastating plague that claimed the lives of 70,000 Israelites. The plague ceased only after David built an altar and offered sacrifices at the very site that would later serve as the foundation for the temple. David's reign, encompassing both its triumphs and its failures, serves as a vivid reminder of humanity's complexity and the enduring necessity of trusting in God. Despite his transgressions, David consistently demonstrated a heart attuned to God, seeking repentance and restoration whenever he faltered. This enduring devotion is why David is remembered as a man after God's own heart, even with his flaws. In the final years of his reign, David focused on preparing for a long-cherished project, the construction of a temple for the Lord. Although God revealed that David's son, rather than David himself, would build the temple, David wholeheartedly dedicated himself to making thorough preparations for this monumental task. 1 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 5 provides insight into David's determination, saying, David said, "My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house to be built for the Lord should be of great magnificence, fame, and splendor in the sight of all the nations. Therefore I will make preparations for it." So David made extensive preparations before his death. David's unwavering commitment to the temple is evident in the vast wealth and resources he accumulated for the undertaking. In 1 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 14, David declares, "I have taken great pains to provide for the temple of the Lord, 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, quantities of bronze and iron too great to be weighed, and wood and stone you may add to them." Beyond gathering materials, David meticulously organized the Levites and priests for their roles in the future temple. He assigned shifts for the priests, arranged for musicians and singers to lead worship, and appointed gatekeepers to maintain order within the temple. These extensive preparations highlight David's deep desire to ensure that worship of God would be carried out with the utmost reverence and precision after his passing. As David advanced in age, the matter of succession to the throne became increasingly urgent. Although God had designated Solomon as David's successor, Adonijah, one of David's other sons, attempted to seize the throne. This dramatic succession crisis is recorded in 1 Kings chapter 1. In response to Adonijah's threat, David took swift and decisive action to secure Solomon's position as the rightful heir. In 1 Kings chapter 1 verses 32 to 35, we read King David said, "Call in the priest, Zadok the prophet, Nathan and Benaiah son of Jehoiada." When they came before the king, he said to them, "Take your Lord's servants with you, and have Solomon my son mount my own mule, and take him down to Gihon. There have Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him king over Israel. Blow the trumpet and shout, 'Long live King Solomon!' Follow him up to the throne, and he is to sit on my throne and reign in my place. I have appointed him ruler over Israel and Judah." Once Solomon was firmly established as his successor, David devoted himself to imparting his final instructions to Solomon and addressing the people of Israel. In 1 Kings chapter 2 verses 2 to 4, David offered Solomon timeless wisdom and counsel, saying, "I am about to go the way of all the earth. So be strong, act like a man, and observe what the Lord your God requires. Walk in obedience to him and keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations, as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and so that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel." In his final recorded address, David spoke to the entire assembly of Israel. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29 verses 10 to 13, he delivered a magnificent prayer of praise and thanksgiving. David praised the Lord before the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name." After a life marked by great triumphs and painful failures, David passed away. In 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 10 to 11, it is written, "Then David rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. He had reigned for 40 years over Israel, 7 years in Hebron and 33 in Jerusalem. Yet David's legacy endured far beyond his earthly life. His influence on the history and faith of Israel remains immeasurable. This impact can be seen across multiple aspects of Israel's spiritual and cultural life. First, David is revered as the quintessential king of Israel, a figure held in high regard even centuries after his passing. Many kings who came after David were measured against his example. The phrase, "a king like David," became a standard for describing a ruler who was both just and devout. Secondly, David's literary contributions, particularly in the form of the Psalms, represent a vital aspect of his enduring legacy. Numerous psalms bear David's name and remain a profound source of comfort, inspiration, and spiritual guidance for believers even today. David's psalms capture the entire spectrum of human emotion, from exultant joy to profound sorrow, from steadfast trust to moments of despair, while consistently reflecting an unwavering faith in God. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, David occupies a central place in Israel's messianic expectations. God's promise of an eternal dynasty through the Davidic covenant inspired the hope of a future son of David who would establish an everlasting kingdom. This hope ultimately found its fulfillment in Jesus Christ, as recorded in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. The New Testament opens with these words, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Throughout the Gospels, Jesus is frequently called the Son of David, and his Davidic lineage is recognized as the ultimate fulfillment of the messianic prophecies. David's life, with its rich complexities, provides timeless lessons that extend far beyond his era or circumstances. David's story vividly illustrates God's sovereignty over the course of history. God chose David, the youngest and least likely among Jesse's sons, to rise as Israel's greatest king. This serves as a reminder that God frequently achieves his purposes through those who are seemingly unlikely or overlooked. David's journey also highlights the vital importance of faith and unwavering trust in God. Whether facing Goliath, enduring years as a fugitive, or navigating the challenges of kingship, David consistently displayed steadfast trust in God, even in the face of overwhelming odds. At the same time, David's life underscores the sobering reality of sin and its consequences, even in the lives of those regarded as heroes of faith. David's sins of adultery with Bathsheba and the orchestrated murder of Uriah had long-lasting and far-reaching repercussions. However, David's genuine repentance and humble acceptance of God's judgment when confronted with his sin offer a model for how we should approach our own moral failures. David's story also teaches us the profound importance of seeking forgiveness and embracing restoration. Despite the severity of his sins, David experienced the boundless forgiveness of God and was restored to fellowship with him. This truth gives us hope. No matter how far we may stray, forgiveness and restoration remain available to all who turn to God with genuine repentance. Finally, David's story reminds us that true greatness in God's eyes is not defined by perfection, but by a heart that persistently seeks him, despite its flaws. David is celebrated as a man after God's own heart, because at his core, his heart consistently sought after God. In conclusion, David's life forms a rich and intricate tapestry that still captivates our imagination and moves our hearts thousands of years later. His remarkable journey, from humble shepherd to the throne of Israel, and his triumphs and failures alike, remain deeply instructive. His moments of victorious faith and devastating failure together paint a vivid portrait of a life lived in dynamic, authentic relationship with God. David's enduring legacy as a warrior, king, poet, and man of faith continues to shape our understanding of godly leadership, heartfelt worship, and what it means to live a life wholly devoted to God. His story reassures us that God can work through flawed individuals to achieve his perfect purposes, and that genuine greatness lies not in being without faults, but in consistently turning to God in every circumstance. May we, like David, aspire to be people after God's own heart, trusting in his grace, heeding his correction, and devoting our lives to his service.